have a rule that people who come in time and they are occupying chair, they must benefit compared to people who come little later. So I'll tell you two issues which I'll finish in 3 minutes, and by that time we will start the regular session. I always say in all my lectures on international taxation that please realize this is very easy. International taxation is not complex. Do not think that you cannot practice it. Anybody who can pass Indian Chartered Accountancy exam, he can practice anything. So never believe that this is only the realm of the big four or any big company. You can certainly practice it. Only the culture or the thinking or the concepts in international taxation are different from the domestic taxation. So we must understand those different concepts, and that is why Chamber is organizing this workshop, that you attend a workshop, then you attend the study circle meetings, and you learn the concepts of international taxation. It becomes easy. You can practice it. Second point, why did I elaborate that Indian Income Tax Act and Indian income tax rates are better than the rates prevalent in most of the countries around the world, ignoring tax havens and ignoring city countries? I very firmly believe that we must be proud of India, despite whatever the politicians are doing. We as Indians must be proud of our motherland. This is general. But in international tax practice, it becomes even more important. Because, you also must have seen that whenever a foreigner comes to India or whenever an NRI comes to India, he starts criticizing India. You are very corrupt. You are very dirty. People spit anywhere and all that. All kinds of things they talk. The moment an NRI starts criticizing India, all the Indian residents also start criticizing India. And this is what I hate. But leave aside my personal issues. When you have a foreigner as your client and he realizes that you have no respect for India, he has no respect for you. Please remember very clearly, if you don't respect your motherland, other people are not going to respect you, and you will not have a sound practice. When we want to practice something and where we are dealing people from other countries, it's not that we say India is superior to your country. No. And I think Narayan Bhai had said it in the best words possible. There was an issue of saying whether India is better or the other country is better. By Narayan Bhai, I refer to Narayan Verma, the pillar of Bombay Chartered Account Society. He said, my mother is the best mother in the world. For you, your mother is the best mother in the world. There is no question of comparison. But if you say that my mother is inferior, then I'll... So the same way, this is the point I'm making, that when I deal with my clients, I deal with as a proud Indian. And okay, those were the 2 minutes on those two issues. We come back to the issue of paragraph 7, the OECD model definition of resident. Definition is given under the Indian Income Tax Act. OECD model only refers you back to the Indian Income Tax Act. Now on this definition also there has been huge amount of controversies. So we must understand very clearly what do we understand by the term resident. US government decides residential status by the concept of citizenship and green card. Indian Income Tax Act ignores both these statuses. Even if you have a work permit in India, it doesn't mean that you automatically become Indian resident. You become resident only if you are in India for 6 months. So, when OECD wants to draft a model, it has to say, first, that go back to the domestic definition of residential status. Now, some countries don't even use the term resident. They will straight away say you are liable to tax provided. So they say that you will be resident of that country only if you are liable to tax in that country. If you are not liable to tax in that country, where is the double tax? And if there is no double tax, where is the question of double tax avoidance treaty? These are fundamental issues. So if you are liable to tax by what means? Liable to tax because either you are resident or you are domiciled or you are citizen. Now they have not used the word green card because Belgium uses white card. So how do you write? So they are saying or any other similar criteria. So Article 4 says if you are liable to tax by a criteria similar to residential status, then for the treaty purposes you will be deemed to be resident of that country. Also it clarifies that you may be liable to tax in a country just because of the source of income being in that country, but source will not make you resident of that country. Now please mark my words. With respect, I have to say that Supreme Court judges have made mistakes in definition under Article 4 and absolutely confused decisions have been given. I'm sorry, but there are incorrect decisions, so give full importance to this Article 4. Like Mr. Patel has interest income from UK. Does he become resident of UK? Certainly not. Tatas have a hotel in London, so they earn net profits or net losses from that hotel in London. Does Indian hotel become a resident of UK? No. So this is what simple sentence says, that just because you have source in that country, you do not become resident of that country. You become resident only if you are liable to tax in that country due to a criteria similar to residential status. Very simple. So all of you have better knowledge than that Supreme Court judge's knowledge on international tax. It's a very important decision. You can have a look at the decision on Chettiar's case, where the decision is incorrect at least on 11 counts. On 11 counts the decision is incorrect, and I have written a very long article. It is available on my website under the title Jurisprudence for International Taxation. This shows the importance of this kind of workshops. The practitioners who were practicing before Supreme Court did not attend this workshop. So, residential status. Now, when I say if you are liable to tax, take two separate cases. One gentleman has income below 2 lakhs. He may be either retired or whatever. Another gentleman is a farmer having an income of 10 lakhs. Both of them are not paying any tax to Government of India. But they have income from abroad. There can be 1,000 different situations where they have incomes from abroad. Can they get the advantage of double tax avoidance treaty or not? There are 6 rulings by authority for advance ruling on this issue. You can master this concept in next 5 minutes. Tell me. Person has income below the exemption limit, or another person who has got income exempt under section 10. He might be having Reserve Bank bonds of 1 crore of rupees, but he is not paying any tax. The concept is, my question is totally unfounded question, and that is why one can get confused. The issue is, are you liable to tax? Liable means if you have taxable income, then would you be liable to tax? If this farmer did trading in grains or fruits or whatever and had business profits, would he be liable to tax? Of course, yes. So he is liable to tax. The other gentleman who is a retired man and has income less than 2 lakhs, assume he has more than 2 lakhs income, would he be liable to tax? Of course, yes. In India, in a population of 125 crores, probably only 7 crore people pay tax. Does it mean that the rest of the people don't get the benefit of double tax avoidance agreement? No, they are entitled to. If they have such incomes, all of them are liable to tax in India. Hence, all of them are residents of India. Hence, under any treaty signed by Government of India, they would be entitled to claim tax credit or the relief under double tax avoidance agreement. Very simple. Okay. So that takes care of paragraph 7, all the controversies of 7. The paragraph 7.3 is about Dubai, on which there have been several case laws. This I have already discussed with you. I will tell you something practical which I have not written down here. When the builders from Dubai come to Mumbai and they organize fairs and all that, and they advertise, come and buy a flat in Dubai, it is very attractive because the flat prices in Dubai are lower than the prices in Borivali. Okay, so those who have got the surplus, they really find it cheap to buy a property in Dubai. Now, there are limitations. You can't remit too much money abroad. Supposing the flat is worth $1 million. It may be cheaper, but then who has got the $1 million? So people go ahead and take loans abroad. And there are people who are prepared to give you loans. Or the builder himself will say, okay, I am giving you 5 years installment. These amount to violations of FEMA. We, the Indian residents, cannot borrow a single dollar from any non-resident. But the more serious matter, I have myself heard in a similar marketing game which the builders play. So the builder was announcing his project and somebody said that we don't have so much money in the bank, which meant that he has got enough money in the black. And the builder said, आप कैसे भी भेज दो, हवाला से भेजो, कैसे भी भेजो, हमको क्या है? You send the money, we will accept the money. This is where you are entering into serious game. And don't get tempted away. I am not talking about the businessmen who are experts in hawala. I am talking even about people who don't understand the significance of hawala, get into it, and when they are caught, then they have to face enforcement directorate. So in Dubai, in fact, I have heard people when they talk from on telephone, and they say, "Arey hawala se bhej deo na." Now for that fellow, this is not significant. For him, buying and selling gold is trade. For us, it is smuggling. For him, hawala is official because Dubai there is no foreign exchange restriction. But in India there are restrictions. So when you deal with a person in Dubai, be careful. Paragraph 9. Okay, let me, I am on at the end of paragraph 8. India has also developed its own model of double tax avoidance treaty. And Indian government, when it comes to international scene, always believes in keeping a low profile. We don't try to say we are the 4th largest economy in the world and things like that. The other day, in October, I was giving a talk in London. And they were all NRIs. They have a sense of putting down India. I wanted to say that India's GDP is larger than British GDP. So don't tell us that we are a poor little country. We must recognize these facts that international economics is as challenging and interesting as international taxation. And when we started in 1987, the discussions on international taxation, people were telling us, आपके पास कौन टाटा बिरला आने वाला है, क्यों प्रैक्टिस करते हो? Okay, mark my words that in 10 years time, people will say that international economics is a big practice. It's as important or probably more important than taxation. For those of you who might be interested, I will be giving a talk on alternative war or economic war at Bombay Chartered Account Society's conference on 17th of this month. Okay, What is economic war? It's a whole issue by itself. I'm just informing you. I will not, sorry, Chairman sir. So India keeps a low profile, but doesn't mean India is poor or India is weak. We have got Indian treaty with Armenia is a model accepted by Central Board of Direct Taxes. This is the model with which India, whenever it has to negotiate a new treaty, it will start with this model, which is largely on the lines of UN model and OECD model, but still wherever India wants to claim its own benefits, Armenia model they have worked out. My paragraph 9.4 International Law Commission, I am talking mainly about Vienna Convention. Please have a look at it. Because I have got something far more interesting, so some of these issues I am not going into depth. You may please consider it even after retiring today evening. Section 206AA and treaty override, this has become an issue of controversies. Section 206AA says if you don't have a permanent account number, then the minimum tax will be 20%. Let us say a person has income from India, fees from technical services, FTS, and as per the double tax avoidance treaty, the tax payable is say 15%. The Indian Income Tax Act provides for 20%. Now which would prevail? This is the whole subject of treaty override. So first, understanding the basics. When Government of India goes out, negotiates with another government and signs a treaty, then that treaty has to have precedence over the domestic law. We have studied Companies Act in the college, and there is a doctrine of internal rules. I may not be saying the correct language, correct terminology, but if a company has got its own articles of association which says the director cannot sign a contract of more than 1 crore. Now the director goes ahead and signs a contract of 2 crores. When the other party makes its own claim, director says, I have signed something which was beyond my power, so the contract is null and void. Courts will not uphold his argument, because whatever is internal rule is internal. You went ahead and signed a contract with somebody, now you better pay for it. If you have, the company can take action against the director. Why did you sign that contract? But the director cannot take recourse of the internal rules. Similarly, if India signs a treaty with somebody and says we will tax your income only at 15%. Now you change your income tax act and say no, we will tax you 20%. Now Mr. Chidambaram has brought in a section 115A, the provision that certain incomes will be taxed at 25%. Can you do that? Well, you can do anything if you are not a civilized person. But a civilized person in an international community would not do what civilized people don't do. I mean, simple. This is the concept of treaty override. Treaty overrides domestic law, and the other way around is not permitted. Not permitted by whom? By a code of conduct of civilized people, that's all. Okay. So, treaty override concept is very clear in our mind that the domestic law cannot override the treaty. Now 206AA is overriding the treaty. Now what is the legal position? My submission, section 206AA overrides the treaty, and that is perfectly legal. So am I contradicting my statement? Yeah, somebody said give the correct answer. No. So why? Please.
Because 206 is a procedural section, it's not a charge. They want, Indian government wants non-residents to obtain ban. If the ban is obtained, then they will not basically...
You are right, but I'll elaborate little more. The purpose of the treaty is to avoid double taxation. The purpose of the treaty is not to encourage tax avoidance. Purpose of the treaty is not double non-taxation. But everybody is doing through Mauritius and through UAE is not the purpose of the treaty. We may as practitioners claim anything, but when OECD and United Nations have drafted their model, they have declared in unequivocal terms that the purpose of the treaty is to avoid double taxation and to avoid tax avoidance. Now, if somebody is abusing the treaty and the government comes out and with an anti-avoidance provision, meaning a legal provision which prevents tax avoidance, then that provision is valid. That provision will override the treaty. This is accepted by United Nations, this is accepted by OECD, and they have written in very clear terms in their commentary. The global trend is, yes, when uncivilized tax consultants do aggressive planning, the government has to play a quid pro quo. Then government has to make a provision which overrides the treaty. So section 206AA is a legally valid section. The other party has to obtain permanent account number, and if he does not obtain, tax payable is 20%. Categorization of income is paragraph 12. A huge amount of litigation in international taxation is because of categorization of income. And let me explain why. You have Article 6, income from immovable property. Let us say Tatas have got a hotel in London, but instead of running the hotel, they lease out the entire building. So Tatas are now not earning business income, but they are earning rental income. So Britain is the country of source. The COS has the right to levy full tax on this property income. So if Tata earns say 100 pounds from Britain, Britain will levy full 30 pounds as tax and Tatas will get only the net 70 pounds. Then Indian government will levy 30% tax, give credit for 30% tax paid in UK, so Tatas will pay zero tax to India. But the country of source will levy full tax. Go to Article 7, business income. If Tatas are running a hotel, let us say first take the illustration which we already discussed, the Taj Mahal Hotel in Mumbai. And a British resident comes here, a British citizen comes here and stays in Tatas, in Taj Hotel. And he has made an advance payment while he was in Britain. So remittance was made from Britain. What is the country of source? Money has been paid from Britain. Is Britain the country of source or is India the country of source? India is the country of source because the business is conducted in India. Tatas are providing accommodation and all the hotel services in India. Entire value addition is made in India. So the country of source is India. The fact that the British resident has come here or British citizen has come here is of no value. Indian government will levy full tax under Article 7, but Article 7 also does not come in the picture here. The British government will not deduct any income tax from the payment made from Britain to India. This is Article 7, that a non-resident's business income is not taxable. As I said earlier, India imports totally goods worth more than $400 billion every year. We don't deduct a single rupee tax from that. It is the foreign supplier who has supplied goods to India. All the value addition is done outside India. We have no right to tax that income. So Article 6 and Article 7 have two contradictory provisions. Then comes royalty and fees for technical services. I mean, by importance I am saying in the sequence of articles there are other articles. Fees for technical services, India has taken a stand that we will tax it whenever an Indian resident is making the payment, period. I'll go to little more details further, but first the simplified statement. Indian resident is making payment of royalty or fees for technical services to a non-resident. He has not done anything in India. All services are provided outside India. He has no PE in India, no business connection in India. Still, India has made the position clear under Section 9 that we will tax that money, and anytime you are giving a certificate to your client, you must ensure that tax is deducted at source. The simple version. Why contradictory provisions? Business income, no tax. Royalty, there will be a tax irrespective of all other factors, except the one factor that Indian resident is making payment. So what happens? The SSE wants to make a claim before the assessing officer that I am earning business income, I have no PE in India, so there should be no tax on it. Department would always try to categorize the income as royalty and fees for technical services. So department will say, no Baba, I will deduct 15% tax from your remittance. This is the issue on which there is a lot of litigation. Essentially, categorization of income under the treaty is to determine what is the right of the COS to deduct tax at source. As I said, Article 6, full right. Article 7, no right. But under Article 7, if the non-resident businessman has a permanent establishment in COS, then the profits earned by the PE will be fully taxable in the COS. Shipping income, no right. FTS and royalties, some reduced right. Interest and dividend, some reduced right. Like that, each category determines a restriction which COS has adopted, has accepted by signing the treaty. All these categories don't make any difference for the COR, as we have discussed earlier. They will just total up all the income which its resident has made and levy the normal tax. Okay. So we are at 4:15. I have discussed a part of explaining the double tax avoidance treaty and international taxation. Now we can go to the tax planning done by Google, or before we go to that stage, if any of you have any queries, you can ask me queries. I'll try to answer those queries, and then we can move over to Google or Nokia. Yes, please.
Related to this 206AA,
Haji.
one of my clients is a foreign diplomat from UAE, and he is exempted from taking PAN number.
Yes.
And now he is owning the building in Bombay, and he is in state of selling that property. So he is refusing to take PAN number. He says, I don't want to take. And after indexation, I will pay the tax, but without PAN number, he cannot pay the tax. So whether he should be taking the PAN number.
Very interesting issue you have raised. Has everybody understood his query? No. Okay, I will repeat. There is a foreign diplomat in the country. Okay. Now, foreign diplomats, there is a separate agreement of consular incomes. I don't even remember, there may be no provision giving them exemption under the Income Tax Act, but via the treaty, right? Is there an exemption under Income Tax Act?
No.
There is no exemption, right?
He is not earning any income.
He is earning from abroad.
But he is earning a rental income.
Correct. Okay. Now let us say this is a UAE diplomat staying in India. He is providing his consular services in India.
No, staying abroad. He comes only for a few months. Otherwise, he is abroad.
So he is a non-resident of India.
Exempted, so he has open bank account, NRO account, but he is exempted, so he has no PAN number in India. And now we are selling the property, so he is refusing to take number. He is saying, I don't want to take PAN.
So you have simplified my issue.
Yes.
But okay, since this issue has been raised, let me tell you that consular income is exempted. Government of India cannot levy tax on a consular salary income from his country. This exemption does not apply to rental income from India or capital gains from India. So if he earns rental income from, first of all, how did he buy the property? That would have been a FEMA violation.
It years.
He must have been deputed here, he must have got at that time.
He cannot buy property. He can stay in a rental property.
No, it's about 50 years back.
So under FEMA, luckily, in offence committed before 2000, but he is holding on. Supposing he is a non-resident of India, he is a foreigner of India, and he continues to hold property in India, is a violation. Continuing to hold property in India is a violation of FEMA. Okay, so you can scare him properly. That he come around on lines. But anyway.
He is Indian citizen.
No, he's abroad. He's a Sheikh, Dubai Sheikh.
Oh,
Sheikh.
So for Arabs,
He doesn't listen to you anything.
He doesn't listen. I agree. No, there are people who are so stubborn, and I'll give illustration of even more stubborn people. But this gentleman, when he earns capital gains in India, he is liable to full income tax in India. There is no doubt about it. Also, he has to take permanent account number. Now, if he does not take it, the Indian buyer who is giving him the money, he will have to deduct tax at the rate of 20%, 206AA, or whatever is the applicable rate, whichever is higher. That tax he will have to deduct and pay to Government of India.
Yeah, but indexation basically we want indexation benefit and balance of course we are paying. He doesn't want PAN numbers.
So supposing you take indexation benefit, so after that the rate is below 20%?
No, then on profit of course 20% we need to pay.
He will have to pay. So see, permanent account number is not a sort of compulsory need. It is an option. You take, then the applicable rate is there. If you don't take, 20% or applicable rate, whichever is higher.
The buyer is not giving the money, he's saying without PAN number.
That is wrong. Then the buyer stand is wrong. Because buyer also... No. It is not necessary. Once he also, let me tell you for clarification, since he is an Arab, in fact, Government of India had 30-40 years back made a liberalization only for Arabs, that you can purchase immovable property in India. The moment they made this liberalization, on Marine Drive, half the buildings went to Arabs. Okay. Then Government of India changed the rule and said no, foreigners cannot buy property in India. So let's say likely your client has purchased it officially. Okay.
You disclose the fact.
Yes, please.
Sir, in case it is net of tax contract, then basically the crossing up would be done at 20% or favorable tax rate.
There are controversies, there are some tribunal decisions, but in my view, if the person does not take permanent account number, and let us say it is payment of FTS, correct? So you have to deduct at least at the rate of 20% and ignore 10% or 15%. Now he is not prepared to suffer that 20% tax also. Here the gentleman is fine enough, he is prepared to accept that 20% tax. But there are people who say, I will not bear any tax. Then you have to gross up. You have to gross up at 20%. Meaning it will be at 25% of the payment you make. 100 rupees payment is to be made, you have to deduct 25 rupees, meaning you have to suffer 25 rupees and pay to Government of India.
But I have all the necessary documents like TRC, no fee certificate.
But without pen, you have to deduct 20%. Yeah. Please.
Sir, on the characterization issue, suppose a non-resident who is providing technical service to an Indian resident. So, for the service provider, it is his business to provide such kind of service. So, how do you decide that whether it is his business or it is a fees for technical service?
He may be in the business, he may be in anything. The treaty characterizes at FTS, and that is the end of the story. He may be in the business, like say we are chartered accountants. We are in the business of providing consultancy services. Here I am ignoring the distinction between business and profession. It is our business. Similarly, there are engineers who are in the business of providing consultancy services. They would say this is my business income, so I fall under Article 7. And I remember 20 years back, people made such claims and they got away with it. The correct legal position is, it is FTS and you are liable to withholding tax in India. Please.
In case of entity, if it is providing a business, maintenance.
Sorry, NCD. Any entity.
Providing business, though there is a grey area that it might be FTS. So if I consider a business provided by a non-resident, it will be 0% withholding tax. If it is FTS, for 10 or 15% or whatever comes, and if not, PAN is not available, 20%. In case the deductor wants to deduct on a prudent basis, 10% as per DTEA, PAN is compulsory. Even though in the 15 CB we mentioned 0% as per Income Tax Act, 10% as per this thing.
Let me simplify your query. First, let us have a simple answer. Somebody has a business income. Let us say it is accepted as business income, right? And he has no PE. Then, 0%. Under the Income Tax Act itself, it is not liable to tax.
Correct, sir.
Correct. Since it is not liable to tax under Income Tax Act, Section 195 and 206AA, they are machinery provisions. They are provisions which help the administration in recovering tax where the tax is due. When the tax is not due, the machinery is of no use. So this gentleman, if he does not take permanent account number also, that is perfectly okay.
No, sir, but since a deductor point of view, FTS being a grey area, whether that service provided is FTS or not, and he does not want the this allowance, he considers and the deductee agrees to have a withholding of 10%.
See, most of the problems arise because the SSC is not clear in his mind. The SSC has to take a decision. Either it is business income, zero tax, then no permanent account number. Or it is FTS, then 10% tax, but then he wants to take the benefit of the treaty. Right? The moment you get into the machinery provisions, 206AA is compulsory. If you stay out of the machinery, 206AA does not apply to you. Get into the machinery, you better take permanent account number or pay 20%. Right? Shall we now move to the... Okay, last question.
Sir, in case there are two entities and both are resident in India, but the remittance is being made in a foreign currency, so will that attract, like, will that require CS or
It would be FEMA violation. How can one Indian resident make payment to another resident in foreign currency? You can't make it. Within India, you have to make payment in Indian rupees only. And assuming, let us for a moment forget all those laws which insist on making rupee payment. When two Indian residents are making payments to each other, Section 195 does not apply. Okay. Now, Section 192 onwards, the entire series of the TDS sections that you have to apply. Okay. If it is tax is deductible on that kind of payment, then you deduct. Otherwise, you ignore. But in either case, when the payment is made by one Indian resident to another Indian resident, Section 206AA has no application. Does it answer your query? Okay. Shall we move to the
Yes.
next? All the rules I have explained to you have been proved to be defective by Google Corporation. And we will discuss that now. Okay. What tax planning Google has done is hugely complex. I did not have sufficient time or capability to understand, so I told my student Ishita. She downloaded a lot of material on it, she studied it, and then she explained to me, sir, it is like this. So that is the planning which I have produced before you. But that complex planning, first for the sake of understanding, I am simplifying. As we all know, Google is the classic model of e-commerce. We don't see the face of Google. What is e-commerce? E-commerce is where the buyer and seller of goods and services don't have to meet physically. They may not be even knowing each other. Google never knows who is using Google. They are not bothered. Okay. It's a cross-country business. The buyer and the seller don't need to meet each other. That is e-commerce. Now, Google has the beautiful model. It does not do anything except providing telecommunication services. There are millions of people who have their websites and they give data access free of charge. You can go to Chamber of Tax Consultants website and you can download the papers. You can go to the Institute of Chartered Accountants website and you can download a whole lot of material. You can go to Income Tax Department's website and you can download a whole lot of material. All this information is easily available to you because of Google. What is the service provided by Google? It's like telephone call or just search facility, right? So there are millions of databases which Google makes available to you. Then there are millions and millions of viewers, data searchers, who go to Google and search the data. And they don't pay anything to Google. So what is the revenue model? Where does the Google make money? It is the advertisers who want to advertise their products and services to the viewers. They give advertisement charges to Google. And what is the advertisement revenue of Google? Would somebody like to make a guess? 2 years back it was more than $35 billion. $35 billion, where the data provider data is free. For viewer everything is free. And Google is earning $35 billion of advertisement revenue. This year of course the income must be much more. Now you don't want to pay tax, which is universal. Nobody wants to pay tax. So what do? So Google is a US company. In its wisdom, it is paying a full tax in USA. In USA, the government policy is if somebody evades tax and he is caught, finish him, make him insolvent, and in the mafia use some different languages and all that, but teach him a lesson so that he is completely destroyed and nobody else would dare to make similar kind of tax avoidance. So Google with its army of tax consultants pays up the full tax in USA. So let us say out of $35 billion, $20 billion is revenue from USA, COR tax. Google is resident of USA, tax payable in country of residence, fully paid up, no controversy. $15 billion is earned from countries outside India, I mean outside USA. There they don't want to pay any tax. So what do? They have set up several companies, a whole network of companies in Ireland and Bermuda. These are tax havens. You set up a company in Ireland and they of course claim that Ireland is a cold country. We have an army of servers there, huge servers in Ireland, and because of the cold environment they get naturally cooled. So the air conditioning cost in Ireland is much lower than in USA. Whatever may be the reason, they have got an army of servers sitting in Ireland and they have got companies and a few hundred employees working in Ireland. These companies earn $15 billion revenue in Ireland. These companies do not declare any dividend at all, so money does not go to USA. Now let us say they have revenue from Britain. Let us say $1 billion come from Britain, $1 billion comes from Europe, $100 million comes from India. Now in all these countries Google does not need to set up a branch. Google has no permanent establishment in India, nor in Britain, nor anywhere else. So Google says we are in the business of providing service to advertisers. They are not providing service to you. They are providing service to advertisers. This is my business income. There is no question of FTS or royalty. Hence, I am not going to pay any tax to Britain, to Europe, to India, or to any country in the world. And Ireland does not impose tax. For simplification, Ireland does impose an ostensible tax, but then it gives so many ways of relief so that his tax, the Google's tax in Ireland will come to some £1,000 or something. Matter ends there. This is the simplified tax planning adopted by Google for its foreign income. Now, your response on the tax planning. You think how the existing principles of international taxation have been used by Google. First, what is the definition of country of residence? For a company, the definition is company is resident where it is incorporated. So you may be doing business anywhere. You open a company in Mauritius, Ireland, Bermuda, Bahamas. There are more than 50 countries who are tax havens. So the moment you open a company there, that company is deemed to be resident of that particular country. Is this definition proper? This is the first challenge. If you go by the letter of the law, then also in my view the definition is wrong. Because for that we have to go to the original British case law of Solomon versus Solomon. Do we remember what we had studied in college? Yes, lifting the corporate veil. And why in Solomon versus Solomon it was decided that a company is a separate legal entity. This is the whole history of it. Point is, when Jamsetji Tata set up Tisco, he did not have sufficient money to put up on a steel plant. So he wanted money from others. Now those people who would give their money to Tata, Jamsetji Tata, they were not prepared to take the risks of his business, nor were they capable of running a steel business. So they said, Mr. Jamsetji Tata, you run the business. If you make profit, you share dividend with us. If you make losses, losses are to your account. And we don't know steel making business, steel selling business, you manage the business. This is the concept of a company. However, when somebody opens a company in, let us say, the most popular tax planning in India is Mauritius, where one firm having an office of this size would be having at least 2,000 companies in its address. Now what do 2,000 companies do in this size of office? Nothing. There are 2,000 files in a few cupboards, that's all. Nothing more than that. Is that self company or a file company a real company? In my submission, it is not a company. To recognize it as a separate legal entity is a blasphemy. There is no such entity. But people consider it as a separate legal entity, then they consider it as resident where it is incorporated, and then they take benefit of the double tax avoidance treaty of that country. In my submission, with full respect, in case of Azadi Bachao Andolan, Delhi High Court decision was right, where it said you don't get the treaty benefit, and the Supreme Court decision was incorrect. But today that is the law of the land, and that is how democracy works. That is the law of the land. The point is, because this kind of definition is accepted by courts and by governments, tax havens have a roaring business. What is the business of a government like Mauritius? Mauritius government's business is to facilitate tax avoidance by the people world over. Bahamas government, Bermuda government, the government's business is to help tax avoidance and tax evasion. And we, government of India and the courts of India, consider after all it is a government. Since it is a government, whatever law it passes, we have to request. Now what is the population of Luxembourg? 30,000, 40,000. That government, the prince calls him Prince of the Kingdom of Luxembourg. What is 30,000? 30,000, even Borivali population must be 15 lakhs. You don't call Prince of Borivali. Now, but they pass the laws, and there are laws deliberately passed so that you can fool the courts of a country. Like Ireland would say, we have imposed a 12.5% income tax. And I remember the discussions which were going on in courts and before the authority of advance ruling 10 years back. After all, there is a tax imposed there. Since tax is imposed, that the entity is liable to tax in that country, hence it is resident of that country. Malta had passed a law, Income Tax Act, I don't remember the rate. Let us say the rate was 10%. It could be 100% for whatever it matters. There was a Companies Act in Malta which said if the company pays X amount of tax on 1st January, before the end of 2nd January the shareholders will be given full refund. Can you imagine this? Company pays tax, the full amount is to be refunded within 48 hours to the shareholders. So when the Maltese Income Tax Act is argued before a court like an Indian court, the court will hold that yes, it is liable to tax in Malta, so it is resident of Malta. Similarly, in Ireland, they have devised laws and a combination of double tax avoidance treaties, so Google pays hardly any tax in Ireland and zero tax in Bermuda, and claims being resident of Ireland and does not pay tax anywhere. Now, definition of company, definition of residential status is at stake. In Britain, there is a huge uproar against Starbucks, against Apple Corporation, against Google and a host of companies. They learned picketing from Gandhiji. Now, Britishers are picketing before Starbucks store and say that please don't consume Starbucks coffee because Starbucks doesn't pay tax to British government. Now let us say somebody avoids tax in India and they are successful in tax avoidance. Do you think a single Indian standing up and saying why are you not paying tax to Indian government? Why we don't take that stand? In fact, the whole profession, everybody, the whole of the media says why Vodafone has not paid tax. Fine, it is perfectly okay. There was a one company of $1 share in Cayman Island. Cayman Island, where does it exist? Nobody knows. That $1 file company and a business of $11 billion was transferred. Bombay High Court Justice Chandrasud says this is all bogus. They are liable to tax in India. And that decision was overturned by Supreme Court. How many people argue and say that Vodafone is taxable in India? What do we mean by its company being a separate legal entity? What do we mean by its residential status? These are very substantial questions one may consider. Whether you agree with me or you don't agree with me, at least give it a thought. But I am now coming to a bigger challenge, an absolute challenge to all the thinking. Google, let us say, earns advertisement revenue of 500 crores of rupees from India. Should India have a right to tax that money or not? Let us go back to the accounting principles. Income accrues and arises only on sales. You consider the case of your client who is dealing in any goods. They may be dealing in textile, they may be dealing in cosmetics, whatever. They have manufactured goods or they have bought and the goods are lying in stock. Does any profit arise? No. We will not pay any tax, we will not advise the client to pay any tax. Profits arise only when the sales are made. If there is a stock and the price appreciates, we don't pay tax. If the price depreciates, then we say cost or market price, whichever is lower. Right? This is all fundamentally accepted principle. The profits arise only on the point of sales. When Google has sold its advertisement service to India, and when Indian advertiser who wants to market his products to the viewers, he pays advertisement revenue to Google, there is a sales function from India. Google's profits accrue and arise when the sales is made and where the sales is made. So, Google has earned 500 crores of rupees from India. Article 7 says these 500 crores of rupees are not taxable in India. My point is, why not? This takes us back to the history of double tax avoidance agreements. International Chamber of Commerce had started drafting out double tax avoidance agreements in the between 1910 and 1920. And of course the First World War was there and Germany was destroyed, and finally Germany was destroyed. Britain, France, they were victors. They said, we don't like this ICC draft model. If a British company is doing business with an Indian company or an African company or any of those colonies were meant to be exploited. Okay, you buy products at very cheap price from India, convert, they are buying say cotton and steel and whatever, convert into finished products and then sell at 300% or 400% price back to India. Now that 300% profit must remain taxable only in Britain, and India should have no right to tax that money. This was the idea, and this is why British government, who was the most powerful in the League of Nations, rejected the draft by International Chamber of Commerce and prepared a draft which became the beginning of the double tax avoidance agreements in the last century. Then the League of Nations it died its natural death. United Nations came in the picture, it continued with the same draft. Then OECD came into the picture, and the rich countries became members of OECD, and they continued with the draft where the goods seller, the capital provider will have the only right to tax, and the client countries, colonies were considered as client countries, would have no right to tax. This is a huge issue which needs in detail study and a whole lot of brainstorming. Only Professor Roy Rohatgi has published a book on, I think it's a basics of international taxation, where in his book he has given right from the beginning all the models. Even in this conference in the first week of December, he raised the same issues. Nobody listens to Professor Rohatgi because it does not suit the tax planning. The fact is, existing model of double tax avoidance treaty is one-sided. It favors certain nations, goes against other nations, and that is the fact. And hence, all the principles which I have explained to you and all the principles which have been accepted by the Central Board of Direct Taxes as well as the Indian courts do need a fresh thinking. Friends, in this workshop I cannot take more time on this issue. Probably if the chamber has a study circle meeting on this, probably we can discuss at length. But with that, at 4:45, I must end my presentation. Thank you.
First announcements. Tomorrow tea will be served to our participants between 9 and 9:30 a.m. and technical session will start sharp at 9:30 a.m. Now coming to the pleasant task. President Yatin Bhai, Chairman Paresh Bhai, seniors in the profession and dear friends. You all will agree with me that Rashmin Bhai, in his lucid, simple and simplified way, explained to us the way in which treaties are to be read and interpreted. He also took us through the interplay between Income Tax Act and DTAA. He also touched upon various articles of DTAA. Sir, this guidance of yours will go a long way in understanding and discharging the professional duties of the participants present here. I, on my behalf and on behalf of all the participants present, propose a very well-deserved vote of thanks and request you all to carry with loud applause. Thank you.
Thank you.